Assalamualaikum and a very, very good evening. You're watching Vantage Point, and I'm very glad today because if ever I discuss Islamic finance or anything that have the word Islam, it's always the stereotypical guest that I have. But today I'm going to shock you a bit because I have the very good Dr. Kerstin Steiner. And she's very well versed in a lot of matters pertaining to simple stuff that we take for granted sometimes, like Zakat, for example. So today I'm going to go from there because she has wide-ranging interests on areas pertaining to this subject matter. And she was even there in the University of Malaya. I'll let her tell us a story about that later. And at the Department of Sharia and Law. And a lot of people will raise their eyebrow. I'm sure even then when you were in Lembah Pantai in University Malaya and looking at it. But I want to start with, because we're in the mood of the budget and pre and during and post budget, and a lot of people are more and more concerned about the economy rather than anything else, from the decreasing subsidies for essential goods or even energy, to how do we get past this have and have not gap? Because we do know that the shifting of the energy of economy is to Asia. However, the bottom 40, some say 60% of the world resides in Asia. And in Malaysia, it's the same case. The bottom 40%, if you compare to the top 20% of the country, is a very wide gap. So, since we were young in this country, if you go to Sekolah Pondok or to the religious schools, or even if you go to the normal national schools, you will know the word zakat, but you will see it more often than not for the layman from a very technical standpoint. However, I've been going where I've been privileged to go to economic forums or even other kind of forums, Sharia forum, for example, local and overseas. The word justice and social justice comes to it first. So maybe I can ask for your deep thoughts on this, because it's not just a mechanism to tax people who are wealthy and give to people who are not, but maybe there's a deeper understanding on how that is seen and how it should be practiced. Your point of view.
I would agree with you, and this is where you are, and I've looked at a historical narrative of how Zakat developed in the Malaysian context. And if you're looking at the classical conceptualization or the very early conceptualization, the idea of social justice and distribution of zakat was the prevailing argument there. It was very much a localized practice where the zakat was going to your local villages, to your local needs, needy people. So you were seeing where the zakat was going. What we then saw was a development, and this started in the early 20th century, a development of zakat being centralized and institutionalized when you had your Islamic religious councils coming in. And this is where the whole idea of zakat changed, and the idea of social justice took a less dominant narrative. So it became much more, and the term my colleagues who were doing studies back then, because I don't have the time machine, were calling it zakat wajah, so the zakat for the ruler. And this was very much undermining the social justice idea. And this is where the challenge for zakat collection and distribution nowadays in Malaysia is, because if you're looking at the institutionalized zakat collection and distribution centers, and I was very fortunate, the PPZ here in the Federal Territories was very happy to talk to me and provide me with data. And they said one of the biggest challenge they have is getting the local element back in there, and the idea of social justice, and that you can see where your zakat is going. And they had a fantastic initiative just about 2 years ago that you can claim a certain proportion of the zakat, if you're paying it to them, back and distribute it yourself, so that you have this local element and seeing how social justice is being done.
Maybe because of the origins, you know, people always link it to Sharia, and people always see it as a must-do thing rather than the intention of zakat itself. From your studies, not just in Malaysia, maybe other parts of the world, looking at other people's studies, how do you see it, and how do you see the concept of zakat versus the implementation of zakat?
The implementation of Zakat globally is very different on context. So this is what I found interesting, because Zakat is one of your 5 pillars of Islam, so it's the fundament of one part of your belief. But if you're looking at the implementation of it, you have very different system in place. You have systems in place where it's part of the state taxation system. So there I would argue that it is less of a religious obligation and is becoming more and more institutionalized, a means also for the government to be running programs for certain parts of the population. You have systems in place like Indonesia, where there are competing organizations who are collecting zakat. So it's very much a choice for you to be saying, I'm paying zakat there or there, and I'm doing it myself. So you are in charge of which parts you want to support. Singapore is very different, where if you are working in Singapore and you're earning a living, a certain proportion of your salary is automatically deducted for the mosque building fund or for Mendaki, religious education there. So as you can see, there are very, very different conceptualizations on the implementation, and it basically depends on what suits the political, the legal, and the cultural system the most.
I have to go for the first break, but once we are back, how do we apply modern financial thinking to the concept of zakat in the 21st century? Because things have changed. In the old days, it might be about yield of rice or wheat. Nowadays, you look at Silicon Valley, for example, and how do you quantify IP, intellectual properties, for example, and how do you look at that? I'm saying all this because at the end of the day, any collection of money, people want to see it being harnessed to its fullest, not just laying somewhere waiting for it to distribute it. Because if you amass a huge amount of resource, especially in 21st century where resource is being fought after, so even parking it somewhere should be able to change the situation at that particular place where it's situated. So how do we look at the concept of zakat with the changing world? That might be the challenge in the 21st century. That we talk after this short break. Thank you for still watching Vantage Point. I'm still here with Dr. Kirsten Steiner. She's the Senior Lecturer at the Department of Law and Taxation, Faculty of Business and Economics, Monash University. But she has been here in University Malaya in Lemah Pantai, and I would ask you to tell stories from that period of your life. But before that, intellectual properties and a lot of thinking about intangible values. If we are living in the knowledge-based economy, so surely knowledge is an asset, an asset that has value. But then how do you link it all the way back to the concept of zakat, for example?
That is one of the challenges, and it's not only looking at personal zakat, so looking at the individual. One of the challenges that Malaysia has decided, or some of the states have decided, looking at how can businesses contribute zakat. So this whole conceptualization of business zakat is also a very, very important topic right now, because if you're looking at how economics, how this has changed. We are no longer talking about the sole trader like 14 back in the good old days, but we are talking about businesses now producing wealth, and how can you ask them to contribute zakat as well. So there are a lot of challenges. We had the challenge when it came to the harmonization project here in Malaysia on zakat, on how we are even quantifying the amount of rice you are supposed to be paying in monetary values. So these are some very tough questions we are facing right now.
So how do you think people should move forward on this? Because zakat and even wakaf, for example, these are coming to the fore more and more, because society's awareness of Islamic financial instruments, for example, going up. And the best statistic I always tell my friends from overseas, that in our Islamic banking system, more than 50% of the customers are actually the non-Muslims. So that's how much faith they have in the system. So how do we move it forward? Because Islamic finance is getting more and more recognition, even in the global world in terms of sukuk, financing and stuff like that. Then surely Zakat and Wakaf and all these other aspects must rise together with it.
That is absolutely correct. So I think that when it comes to Islamic banking and finance, particularly in Malaysia, it has a good reputation, and it has a good reputation globally as well, which is, for me, it is very, because I am very passionate about Malaysia, so it's very good to see that it has been acknowledged. In the area of Zakat, you have a very lively exchange. Indonesians coming over, Bruneians coming over and receiving training here, and same happening in the general area of Islamic banking and finance. I think when we're talking about a global phenomenon in general, we have a two-step process. We have the challenges in the area of Islamic banking and finance, in particular looking at the local level and looking at what is the market there, and also how are we ensuring that this is Sharia compliant. This is the so-called benchmark debate on whether something is Islamic or not. So we have this going on at the local level, but we also have it at the global level. So I think in order to give it much more weight globally, we have to look at the local benchmark levels beforehand before we can engage globally.
The ecosystem, infrastructure and human capital has been said as the main thing for Islamic finance or trade to prosper. But I have an interview with the prince from Liechtenstein, when that was way back a few years ago, when the EU had the new ruling and secrecy laws had to go and stuff, and they were looking at Islamic finance as one of the new areas to develop. So if that is the case, I think you've been here long enough to know that sometimes anything Islamic that is mentioned, even for economy and finance or zakat, then the issue of Muslim versus non-Muslim, it becomes a touchy issue. So, but if we put it into perspective of what we have just discussed just now, so where do you think the fears, the insecurities, and the misperception lies in all this?
I think Islamic banking and finance is an example where it can work. And I've been looking also at matters of how you are delineating jurisdiction and competency between the civil system and the Islamic system. And I have to say, well, it took a couple of years, but the relationship between the Sharia boards, the Sharia Advisory Council, and then how it is engaging with the High Court, this has established a very well working relationship. It would be nice to see a similar well-working relationship in other areas of Islamic law.
So you have a very positive outlook of where all of this is going inside Malaysia.
Partially.
Yeah, okay. What gives you the conviction to see such?
I believe the Islamic banking and finance system, we're looking at a system, I would argue, that has been in place since Tabung Haji was established in the 1960s. So we're talking about something like 50 years of experience. And what you see in that area is how the confidence of the consumer has increased in this area. And we also see the interest it has raised for non-Muslims, because I agree, for a non-Muslim it is can also have certain clear advantages to look at these areas and to think about investing there, particularly if you are very conscientious about social responsibility and environmental responsibility and these things. So it's a very, very important alternative in that area. When it comes to other areas of Islamic law, I think we are looking still at a couple of years of conflict ahead. And I mean conflict in the sense that you have to start looking at the relationships, and this is for me particularly in the area of family law, which is going to be the next one I'm looking at.
Okay, I like that too, Islamic law. We still owe you guys at home the story of how doctors survive in New Malaya and what's the interesting stories from there, because there's always the learning from the social aspect back into the economic and political leadership, for example. So let's discuss that after this short break. You are still watching Vantage Point. I'm having a good discussion here for me, because I'm learning a lot already, even from the two blogs before. And I want to go on forward. And you mentioned Islamic family laws and all that. And it's not easy when one parent is non-Muslim and the other parent is a Muslim, and then there's this custody battle. We have read that in the papers a lot of times. But moving forward, I believe if we understand things rather than see just the surface of it, so we can make ground. However, for that to happen, maybe social interaction has got to be the place where it starts first, not just looking at the decision of the courts of law first, for example, because society needs to be the interacting point where all this happen. From your experience in New Malaya and wherever else in Malaysia, how do you look at that capacity moving forward? Because sometimes when we get too excited talking about ourselves, pluralism is good, but sometimes the heightened state of things, we only see more conflict rather than solutions. But I think for you who objectively study things according to the facts laid out, so you can see more hope.
I agree with your comment that it is a very highly emotionalized debate that we see in Islamic matters in general in Malaysia, which I think is to a certain degree a pity, because if you're looking at the arguments both sides are presenting, and as an academic you are always very conscientious of looking at both sides of an argument. As a lawyer, you know the classical answer is it depends to any legal problem. So some of the positions are not that far away, and it would really be very valuable if you could try to leave the emotional side of things out. Having said that, I acknowledge this is very challenging, because we're talking about religion. This is something very personal and something that people tend to be very passionate about. Yes.
If I were to move forward on that, you've been to even Japan and look at society across. If I see it more from the society's standpoint, even if I go back to Zakat, it's supposed to help empower people rather than putting a burden on people who have more than others, for example. But it's so easy to see it the other way around. Why should I share something with somebody who I don't even know and stuff like that? So which example could you give us where this stereotypical look has been broken? Because if we use Zakat creatively, it can really narrow the distribution of wealth in society. It's simple as that.
That's one of the reasons I looked at Zakat, because I find it a very interesting social justice concept, and the idea behind it are not very dissimilar to what ideas you have in other religions and other philosophies. So that was what was fascinating me. But here it was one of your core beliefs. It was also something that you had termed in certain legal aspects. Having said that, I think that the whole Islamic discourse here in Malaysia is going to continue for years to come. Particularly the areas you've mentioned with the conversion camps. We just had the Indira Gandhi case decided end of July. This is going to go on appeal. That is clearly, and then we have to wait and see what the superior courts are saying. This it would have been nice, if I may say nice, it would have been a good idea if we could have a dialogue at at a professional and an emotional level, where the sides were really trying to work these matters out. And as I said, in the Islamic banking and finance area, this was possible. It is working. It's been accommodated in
so just
this
move
system.
it across to the other side.
I wouldn't know. the place for this is neither. That is in particular the conversion case. So that might be another interview. But the issue is that these two sides are portraying themselves in a very dichotomized manner. So it's either one or the other. And as soon as you're taking that standpoint, you cannot come to a win-win situation. It's always win-lose.
Let me pick the lawyer in you on this matter. Legal pluralism. When I was reading your background, I was very taken by that phrase. How far does it really exist, for example, in Southeast Asia, and how far can we really implement that? Because sometimes it looks like two trains going head to head.
I think that's the fundamental problem. If we're talking about legal pluralism, we always have this conceptualization in our mind. We are talking about two neat boxes separated from each other, two trains.
Like totally alien.
Totally alien to each other, but it doesn't work that way, because law is not a separate part. It's involved in politics, it involves in society, it has aspects of economy, culture, and all these things. And this is the same problem we have when we're talking legal pluralism, because these two trains aren't two trains. They are overlapping, they are merging, they have common elements, they have very different elements. And that is the problem, that how we are perceiving legal pluralism, because when you're talking about that, you're always saying, well, Malaysia has at least two very distinct legal systems. This approach doesn't work. So we have to talk about reconceptualizing legal pluralism and acknowledge that there are areas of overlapping.
Would looking at the spirit of the law rather than literal meaning of the law be helpful in that case?
The problem is with the spirit of the law, you're always going with interpretative approaches, and
too subjective.
It's very subjective. That is one of the biggest issues. I agree, it is something that can assist, has got its complete role as a legal methodology, but I personally find it very, very open to subjective interpretation, and this is where it is then very difficult to rein it back in.
So the way out?
The way out. I wish I had the answer.
But you've seen steps being taken to progress on this.
I wish I had the answer. Now, it is a very, very challenging problem, particularly when we're talking about this intersection between the different legal systems. We've seen where political will can take us. When we are talking about the conversion cases and non-Muslim spouses, etc. We had the cabinet decision in 2009 saying conversion by one parent is not sufficient. We had earlier this year your administration of Islamic law bill, which was going completely different direction, and then since then has been withdrawn. I think it's going to take a lot of political will, but it's moreover going to take a lot of support from society at large to find a solution for that problem.
Civil society is back to them.
It is back to them. Yes.
But in civil society also, I mean, if I take the leaf from the more advanced West and America, the more you have civil society moving to the center, you'll have far right and far left, for example. You've been in Asia long enough, or Southeast Asia. How do we not repeat that mistake?
I think you have a very diverse approach to civil society, and I wouldn't say that the West is usually a role model to follow. I'm very conscientious about this. They've been making a lot of mistakes along the way themselves. So you have a very, very diverse civil society here in Malaysia, and in particular, if you're looking at the NGOs that are involved in this area, you have they themselves have very different ideas of conceptualization of Islamic law and the way forward. And I think you have to get them in the fold, in the discussion.
Yes, always the dialogue. always a discourse. Thank you so much, Dr. Steiner, for making time to be here, for sharing your thoughts. We'll have to get you back again because I would love to hear the stories while you were in University of Malaya. We don't have time for it today. Thank you so much. Thanks to you for watching Vantage Point. We'll see you in another episode of Vantage Point very soon. Before that, remember, send in your own views. We have Instagram, we have Facebook, we have Twitter accounts for Awani. We also have YouTube channels, and just go to astroawani.com. Bye-bye.